People are kind of awful a lot of the time. A lot of people aren't, don't get me wrong, but yeah, so sometimes it's as if the filters that we have that regulate how we engage with people face to face are just completely gone. And so whenever someone has just a really horrific thought in their head, then they just push it out there, and then I have to read it and feel terrible about the state of the world. Today we're venturing into the Are Women subreddit to find ourselves some modern women. Our first one is titled In Search of Advice. June of 2018, I was in love with 2 men. I chose man A, but before telling him, I talked to man B about choosing A, and then B convinced me to not pick A. I married and had my son with man B. We are for the most part happily married. My husband has ADHD and so do I, so we bump heads a lot. During our first 2 years, I frequently thought of how life would have ended up with man A. Then I started to work on my depression, anxiety, and ADHD, and I found myself loving our lives and not thinking about man A other than seeing him around town. I love my husband more now than when we first married. Man A still manages to pop up in my head. So can someone tell me why I am the way I am and what should I do? Now, there's an update here that I'll read out shortly. But what's really funny to me about this is she married this guy. She says 2018, right? So that's 5 years ago. This is a thread that's only 10 days old. This is 5 years ago. That's a very long time to still be holding on to a torch for someone that you had 5 years ago. And what's really frustrating about it is she tries to present it in this way as though she's not the person who chose the man that she married and then decided to have a son with him, and openly states herself that they're happily married, but somehow she still has this fantasy that she has in her head where she spends ages thinking, oh wait, maybe what if, and she excuses it that she did this for 2 years after they got married, which I would consider a form of emotional cheating, to be honest. I think it's completely wrong and unacceptable. And so she did it for 2 years. And then she says, that the relationship got even better. Everything is great. But she still has this thought in her head. This is the perfect example to me of someone who cannot commit. Or at least who is not committed. And I don't know why she isn't committed, to be honest. I find it extremely irritating that she says, oh, man B, her current husband, is the one that convinced her to go for him rather than for the other guy. And she had originally chosen the other guy, so now she's hanging on to this. That's pretty awful. I don't think the majority of women would pick a guy that they're not actually into just because he talks them into it. And so there is this intense need to refuse to take responsibility for her own choices and to stand by her choices. I think when you make the decision to get married to someone and have a kid with them, then you should be 150% committed to that relationship. You should go into it with the perspective of, okay, I'm going to try absolutely everything that I can to make this work. And if you have this torch that you're still holding on to from 5 years ago, then you should just let go of it. Just stop thinking about it. Move on with your life. You can see some of the comments here. People don't really agree with me. One person says, it's not necessarily bad or wrong to think about what could have been. I'm sure everyone does it with ex-partners or past flings. I would say if you're focusing on it multiple times a week, then it would be a problem. It definitely would be hard to move on from loving someone if you had to see them around town all the time. I would talk to your therapist about it. They'll definitely help you work through some of these feelings. And yeah, okay, maybe people need therapists to help them work through this kind of stuff. I would always say, you made your choice, you're happy. Do not ruin your marriage because of some fantasy that you have in your head. This is ridiculous. This is the response that I think I would give to someone if they were my friend, for example. I'd be like, okay, come on. You need to look at your life, and you need to look at your son, and you need to look at your decisions. You need to look at your marriage, and you need to move on. You made a decision 5 years ago that, by your own words, you are quite happy with. So you should actually own that and move on. Now, what's hilarious is that OP then decides to get in touch with man A, which I really borderline cheating, honestly, borderline cheating. So she gives this update. She says, I said F it, and I texted the other guy to get closure. I guess you could say it blew up in my face. He said, what do you need closure for? We never dated. We just had sex and that's it. So clearly I'm crazy. 1, for thinking I had a relationship with someone who did not feel the same way. 2, for continually thinking about someone who probably never even thought of me. I feel pathetic and like nobody in my life has ever wanted me, mainly due to my abandonment issues from my father and mother. I know my husband and my son love me and I'm thankful to have them. Just in this moment, I feel like being dramatic and depressed, but I'll snap out of it soon. Oh my God. So she decides to reach out to this guy that she would have picked 5 years ago, despite the fact that she has a husband and she has a son and she has a happy marriage. And when he's like, I don't know what you want from me. Can you it's 5 years. Let's not. Then she's all dramatic and depressed about it. She's like, I'm crazy for thinking I had a relationship with someone who did not feel the same way. And then she says she feels pathetic and like nobody in her life has ever wanted her. And honestly, what that's like, if she really did just want to get closure and she wasn't hoping to get into some kind of affair with this guy, then I don't think that she would have been so depressed by it. I don't think she would have been so crushed by it. I don't think she would be so dramatic. Like, this is ridiculous. So this to me is the perfect example of someone who really, 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 really wanted to cheat. And then it didn't work out. It didn't work out. Thankfully, it did not work out. Now, hopefully, she will take it as a sign from the universe that she should really focus on the things that matter. And she should put a little bit more time into her family and into her marriage and into her son. And hopefully, they will all have a nice, happy ending where they get to maintain their relationship and their family life. But this is terrifying to me. Like if I had anything like this going on in my in my circle of friends or in my relationship, I'd be like, there's not a good sign. This is not a good sign at all. The next one is titled, "Is this what women deal with on a regular basis?" I, 34, have heard all the stories about women and how they walk anywhere at night, carrying keys in between fingers, keeping an earphone out or off the ear, on the phone with someone, head on a swivel, etc. I've been very fortunate not to have been in a position that made me feel like I need to do those things. I tend to be more masculine looking, heavy black boots, baggy dark pants, baggy sweater, hat, with my hair tucked in, looking shorter than it is. So that might be part of the reason. No one notices me. However, tonight around 1:30 a.m., I was taking my dog Meg out for her bedtime walk. There was a gentleman walking towards us. He stopped to let Meg sniff him. He didn't say anything to me. Meg was anxious to get on her way and we moved on. He had stepped on ice and snow and it didn't sound like a normal step. In that moment, I thought he was turning around to grab me, and that sent me into an absolute panic. And I genuinely feared for my life in that moment. And I kept looking over my shoulder until he was inside a nearby building. Then I felt safe. Is this what you'll go through every time you walk anywhere at night? What I dislike about this one is this idea that this is actually like that you should not be vigilant, that there is something unique about the female experience. And me, okay, yes, to a certain extent, maybe it is unique about the female experience because women are more vulnerable than men. And so when you're walking by yourself at night somewhere where there are people around you, then it's completely fair enough to keep an eye out. One of the sad things about this is that somehow it's been kind of indoctrinated in women that this is a sign of sexism or this is a sign of misogyny or a sign that we as a society don't value women and their safety. No, it's just that you do not want to find yourself in a vulnerable position outside when you're unprotected and by yourself. And this is true for anyone who is especially vulnerable. If you're a super old person, I would say you should be careful. If you're a child, you should 150% be careful. And if you're a woman, especially if you're a petite one, then yeah, you should also be careful. If you're a guy who also does not look at all threatening, who's a bit on the shorter side, who seems to look rich for whatever reason, if you're rich and you look obviously visibly rich, you should also be careful. There are lots of things about you when you're walking around at night that there's just circumstances, things could happen, and if you want to be safe, then you should keep an eye out. And this is a completely normal thing. That she says this guy didn't even talk to her, and yeah, I understand being in this situation where you're like, okay, if I take the dog out for a walk, and I have a pretty big, relatively kind of scary dog, if I take the dog out for a walk at night, would I do that? I would do that, I guess, but I wouldn't do it very happily, and I would be very careful about it. And yeah, if I saw a guy walking around, then I would either make sure to avoid him, or I would make sure that the dog stays pretty close by. And if the dog went over to sniff him, I would also be out there as fast as I could. And I don't think that this is an abnormal thing at all. If you live in a city, then this would be like, I just honestly wouldn't go out at night, to be honest. Like that's one of those environments where I'd be like, you know what, maybe it's just too risky. Maybe it's not a risk that I want to take. And you can see some of the comments. One person here says, even as a child, I was pretty vigilant. My mom would tell me stories from the newspapers about kids being kidnapped or assaulted in public bathrooms. To this day, I kick the door in and check for someone just hanging out in the stall. And when I leave the stall to go to the sink, I'm looking at the mirror over my shoulders. When I'm walking to my car at the grocery parking lot, I always check my surroundings before unlocking my car. And when it's unlocked, I quickly enter and relock it. I keep my phone on me at all times when out in public, but I don't use it if it's a quiet area with not too many people, as it can be a distraction and give a false sense of security. In buildings, I'm careful not to be trapped in an elevator with just one male, especially if the building is mostly empty. I never have my back to people either. If it's a high crime area, I don't go out after sundown, but I've generally lived in very nice areas where walking at night is no big deal. I'm still careful though. My guard does not drop if a male is around and it's dark and isolated. In the back of my mind, I prepare myself to fight back if I have to. When they keep walking past me, it's usually such a relief. But I do understand what you mean about just getting this vigilance thing. It's out of necessity. Growing up, other than the bathroom thing, I didn't ever worry about people being violent or whatever. Attacks are rarer in cushy areas, but they still happen. Situational awareness is so important. And so you see that there is this idea to some extent that this is unfair. And yeah, maybe it's unfair that we don't all get to walk around and feel safe and secure 100% of the time. But you would also be extremely naive if you think that that's a normal expectation for you to have. One of the things, I don't know how many people come across these things, but for example, there are videos out there on the internet now of pretty sudden knife attacks in, let's say, a train station. And so if you're hanging out at a train station, you're just coming back from work, like everything's pretty normal, or you're going to visit a friend, you don't have any expectation of things happening around you, and some maniac just grabs a knife and stabs a couple of people very suddenly at random. And in those videos, you will often notice the person that gets stabbed, or the people that get stabbed, are the ones who look the most distracted. They're the ones who are on their phones, who are have 100% blinders onto their environment, have no awareness at all of what's going on around them, and they seem to be often the ones who are in the situation where they get injured. And obviously that sucks. I'm not saying that it's their fault that they got injured at all, but I think that this is one of the most horrifying situations and scary things that could happen to someone. And if you can avoid it just by actually keeping your head up, looking around, making eye contact with people, making it clear that you're not there to be a victim, then chances are a lot of people will avoid you. And so this is not sexism. Truly, I really, truly 100% believe that this is not sexism. I think it's just one of those realities of life that you just have to accept as someone who is a little bit more vulnerable than half the population, for whatever reason that might be. The next one. My fiance thinks Women's History Month is negative because it celebrates suffering. We got in a big fight over this. I told him I celebrate the fact that other women fought to make sure I can vote, I can own land, I can own a business and a bank account when I wasn't able to before. I think that's worth celebrating. Other people do too, since there's a month dedicated to it. He thinks it's not good to focus on the negative. He said, now we're taxed for two in the home. I'm sorry, what? Then said he thinks men should have a history month and be honored for the suffering they went through. I said, okay, select the month and we will. But I also reminded him of President's Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day, which all celebrate men who fought for our rights. I'm so upset because he sounds like a misogynist. I want to teach my future children to be proud of being a man and proud of being a woman. My grandma was the first female truck company owner in California in the 70s. I think that's so badass. So I'm kind of freaking out that the person I'm going to marry thinks Women's History Month is a bad thing. I don't get it. He's a great man, but every once in a while he shows me something I can't believe I'm seeing or hearing. I love him. I'm just scared that something small like this could eventually be something bigger. I feel disrespected as a woman if the history of the past 100 years isn't worth celebrating because it's negative to him. Now, what I think is super confusing about this is I'm pretty sure that he heard suffering And actually he's thinking suffrage. So women's suffrage, i.e. women's right to vote, and she somehow didn't get it, despite the fact that she wrote this whole thing up. So honestly, I'm not too sure that either of them are educated enough to be having opinions about Women's History Month. But let's just accept that that's where we are. I do not think that thinking Women's History Month is stupid makes you sexist or a misogynist. I would argue that you can identify sexist people or misogynist people based on their behavior and how they actually treat women, and the fact that we've ended up in this situation where for whatever reason we make up a month to celebrate whatever. That's not like, no, this is not something that's actually serious. It's not something that we need to do. You don't need to separate women's history from men's history. You don't need to separate Black history from white history. You don't need to separate gay history from straight history. Like all of these divisions that we keep creating for each other and all of these groups that we want to highlight for particular months of the year, it's a little bit overblown and a little bit exaggerated. And even I don't even know how many years ago it was, but there's a nice little clip from Morgan Freeman himself saying that he thinks Black History Month is a bit of a stupid idea. So I like, this is a completely valid criticism to have. And I also don't believe that saying, hey, now we're taxed for two in the home means that he's a misogynist either. I think that if you admit, if you're just open and honest, if you're honest about the fact of what happened when women entered the workforce, then you will know that the consequences were pretty dire for women actually across the board. And so the value of one income went down dramatically. Labor became much cheaper. So now you're required to have two people working in a household in order to have enough of an income that you can actually sustain your life. Whereas previously it was possible for one person to be working and to still sustain a good life for a family. And so one of the things that changed actually is now women have to work in a way that they didn't have to before. This does not mean, if you think that, then you're not necessarily saying women should stop working. But it's just the facts of what happened and some of the things that changed after women were invited into the workforce. And so this whole the idea to me of trying to break up your potential marriage because of some opinion like this, it says to me one of the things that I've noticed about quite a lot of feminists, and honestly maybe I was probably guilty of this too when I was like 20 years old, where you have a really, 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 really hard time accepting that there's a different perspective, and then that perspective doesn't have to be sexist to disagree with you. I think feminists have gotten so touchy about feminism, about the idea of equality, that any challenge to any of those ideas immediately means, well, you know what, you don't think that women should have rights. And if you have that opinion, then, like how could I be with someone who thinks that women shouldn't have rights? I'm a very firm believer in having a shared value system with someone that you marry, because I do think that saves you quite a lot of conflict and quite a lot of struggle throughout your life. So if you manage that will help you out. But this is one of those things where I would say, OP, you are overthinking it. And coming onto a forum or Reddit, into a subreddit area like this, where 100% of the comments you're going to get are, oh my God, he's a misogynist, you should break up with him. You're setting yourself up for failure. You should get yourself some opinions from people who do not necessarily already agree with you that Women's History Month is the most important thing that's ever happened to women in the last 100 years. You can see here, perfect comments, man. Typical misogynist, what about me syndrome. I can guarantee you this man doesn't actually give a shit about having a Men's History Month. He just hates that women are being celebrated. It's like how some people complain about Pride Month, because why don't we have a month to honor soldiers as if they're connected and as if they actually give a crap other than to hate on other people? I think you need to have a conversation with him about his values. It's not something you'd want to ignore. Why is it negative that women now have rights? Yeah, you both have to be taxed because women have financial freedom and are no longer men's property and are seen as actual people. This man is either very, very dim or he's misogynistic. I love how those are always the only reasons. Like, maybe he just doesn't think that Women's History Month is a big deal. Maybe there are other women in the world, including women like myself, who own property and who don't have a problem with owning property, but who also don't think that Women's History Month is the end of the world. This is just, I don't know why we take these it's very performative to me. You take these things that just honestly don't matter in the great scheme of things, and we make such a big deal out of them because it's just a matter of principle. It's just so that we can show everyone else, well, of course I believe in women because I celebrate Women's History Month. The next one. I want to make a piece of media where men are the heavily sexualized gender, but I'm not sure how to make it as humiliating for men as mass media sexualization usually is for women. I sexualize men in my art anyway because I think they're hot, and I've gone with this reverse objectification mindset for a while. The issue is that there aren't oppressive systems built on and benefiting from objectifying men, so men are not bothered, or more accurately, threatened when they are being blatantly sexualized. But I want to make that emotional effect the point of the piece I make. I want to convey what true equality is like if we're going to continue to be okay with the objectification and dehumanization of highly idealized women. Any thoughts or anything you notice? Most men are more disturbed by being involved in feminine aesthetics and behaviors, but I do not find that sexually appealing personally, so it wouldn't work for what I'm trying to achieve. Maybe getting male characters to do weird, awkward, fetishy stuff would do it. And then she has a couple of examples from anime that I'm just gonna skip. So honestly, I read this and I just want to puke a little bit. So the sad thing is that she believes the sexualization of women is dehumanizing, especially in media. And yeah, she thinks that men feel that women, especially that women, feel threatened by it, and they don't like it because oppressive systems are built on it. I would really love to understand exactly what oppressive systems she's talking about and how she sees this actually play out in like the day-to-day life. But we're just going to accept that at face value for now. Now, I'm not very comfortable with the over-sexualization of women in, let's say, advertisements, in magazines, in media, in movies, in film, etc. So I'm not super comfortable with it. I understand why it happens, and I understand that there are some contexts to it, and I understand that actually in a lot of cases women choose to do it themselves, and therefore, you know, sex sells, and that's one of the things that they decide to do. For example, if they put up pictures of themselves on Instagram, then that's a choice that they're making. And obviously there are now hundreds of thousands of women, I assume it's in the hundreds of thousands of women on OnlyFans who are also selling their looks all by themselves, and this is a choice that they make. And so if women do this, then to a large extent they're kind of accepting the sexualization and the objectification of women, and in fact they're not only encouraging it, but they're profiting from it. But let's ignore all of those women. We're going to take the women like me who find that the very hypersexualized ideal of a woman is a bit much, and I find it a little bit distasteful. Now, under normal circumstances, you would say, if I'm uncomfortable with this and, you know, men behave like pigs, which I guess is kind of the point that she's trying to make in the way that men treat women because they see them as sexual objects. And this is not a good behavior, and it's dehumanizing and it's degrading, and we don't want to support it. And so rather than having this perspective of how can we elevate the way that we engage with each other as the opposite sex and treat each other with a bit more respect and a bit more appreciation than that, she says, how can we reduce ourselves as women so that we also treat men in exactly the same way? And obviously that's pretty childish. It's pretty ridiculous. I don't think it matters, because I think that there's a fundamental difference between the two sexes that you're just not going to manage to overcome with this kind of thing. Of course, men are not going to be threatened by being sexualized in the same way that women are, because as we just had, there are physical differences, and women will always, generally speaking, feel more vulnerable than men will. And they are objectively much more vulnerable in a sexual way than men are. The consequences of sex for women are much, much larger. So there's not really like that. You can't make the comparison. You can't treat it the same. But to even wish that you can create a form of media where you just try to embarrass and humiliate and degrade and dehumanize and objectify men maybe says something bad about you as a person. And unfortunately, OP is like very, very defensive over this and 100% stuck to her guns on it. So you can see one of the comments here from a different person says, just want to say this sounds great. There should be a day each week when we are allowed to sexualize and objectify men to let them be aware of what we suffer for the other 6 days of the week. And you know, what I also really don't understand is how women get this idea in their heads that men don't get sexualized at all. The whole superhero genre in movies, for example, I'm pretty sure there's always at least one scene where the man is, the lead is half naked. I'm pretty sure that's completely like it's fan service. That's what you would call it. It's totally about sex appeal. But okay, women are the only ones who can sexualize men without it being a problem, and this is right. Like this is how we should treat it and how we should make it. You can see here now the comments from OP that I just found completely ridiculous. OP says, I don't feel bad. I've grown up in a society dehumanizing me, so no sympathy for the perpetrators. Again, as if all men are just this one glob. You can treat them all as one monolith. All men who disrespect women deserve to be disrespected equally, which kind of makes sense if you're at least going to add the who disrespect women. Then you can say, okay, maybe we can disrespect them back. But like this is just like, I just want to draw something or write something that makes men feel bad. And like I said, obviously men won't care, but just the idea of it makes you a terrible person. And then the next one says, not to mention, if we all sexualized each other, we'd all feel some sense of power and control, so it would mellow out and be chill. What's your solution to the dehumanization we experience from sexualization? Just gonna shut up and take it? And so clearly OP just wants to feel a little sense of power over the opposite gender because she feels uncomfortable, I guess, and what she feels has been taken from her, she wants to take from other people. And that's sad. Like this is not a good standard. This is not how we should engage with each other. This is not how we should interact with each other across the board. And I think it makes you kind of a terrible person. The last one. Some men are mad that I, 26-year-old female, am making a podcast about relationship advice. How do I not care about their opinions and continue on? I recently relaunched my podcast and social media personality to give people relationship advice based on my own experiences. I most recently just exited a 4-year on and off emotionally abusive relationship. I believe my ex is a narcissist and I endured a lot of manipulation, gaslighting, devaluing, etc. I had started a podcast that I stopped doing for a while because I felt like a hypocrite giving women advice while continuing to stay in this unhealthy relationship. Since then, I really want to help women and all people avoid these types of relationships. My brand also has a strong focus on self-development and non-romantic relationships, so I started posting again. There are some men who are upset and bashing me on social media, claiming I can't give advice because I have zero relationship success and I'm not smart and so on. All of these men are people I know personally who are womanizers and misogynists. Obviously, I should not care, but it still bothers me and makes me feel like as I grow, they're going to get more hateful and malicious. My platform is not even targeted at men, and I have no intentions of bashing men. I love all people. I'm just giving general dating and life advice, but I feel like because it's coming out of a woman's mouth, they are upset. Now, obviously, one of the things that are true of the internet, like everywhere, is that the internet is always pretty critical. And honestly, like I get depressed when I spend too long on social media too, just because people are kind of awful a lot of the time. A lot of people aren't, don't get me wrong, but just, yeah, so sometimes it's as if the filters that we have that regulate how we engage with people face to face are just completely gone. And so whenever someone has just a really horrific thought in their head, then they just push it out there, and then I have to read it and feel terrible about the state of the world. And so that kind of sucks. I get a little bit where she's coming from, but the fact that people are criticizing you does not make them misogynists. And it's completely valid criticism to say, if you're going to have a podcast about relationship success, you should be someone who has succeeded at relationships. So I think that that's pretty valid criticism. No one wants to hear, here's how to become a millionaire from someone who is not a millionaire, right? So there's something about it that just goes, well, why are you the one giving me advice about this? Why should I take anything that you say at face value? Why should I believe that you have that your points are actually right? If you cannot actually act out the lessons that you're giving people and prove that they are at least successful in your individual case, ideally, actually, if you're going to do some kind of relationship counseling or something across the board, then you have you have lots of cases, you have lots of examples of people who have done this, then you are qualified to give relationship advice. And I think that that's a pretty normal bit of advice to, like, that's just normal critique. You don't have to take it seriously. Honestly, if you're this touchy about it, then they're probably right. They're probably right. There's something about the moment that you feel called out, then everyone gets, very, very defensive. And if you're very defensive, then it's usually a sign that what they're saying struck a chord, and you know that they're right. Yeah, OP's amazing comments here where she tries to explain herself. She says, I used to feel so ashamed for being single or not chosen by these types of people. I was always seeking their validation by engaging in degrading relationships and trying to prove my worth to them. After this relationship, I realized that true success is happiness, peace, and love. Those things don't necessarily exist in a relationship, especially an abusive one, and can absolutely be created on your own and with friends. And now, dear OP, I would say if this is your belief and this is what you're espousing in your podcast, then I kind of get where people are coming from. I really hate it when people do these relationship advice or dating advice types of things where they're telling women especially, the way that you find happiness is by being happy with yourself and just accepting who you are. All your feelings are valid. Everything, all of your behaviors are completely valid because they're motivated by your feelings, and you never have a problem with feelings. Of course, we have to accept them and be compassionate and be empathetic. And the more independent you are, the stronger you are, the more confident you are, the better you feel being alone, then the happier you'll be in a relationship. Obviously, that's not true. If you're coming at relationships from the perspective of, I am a complete, perfect human being the way that I am, and I don't need to work on myself. I don't need to bring anything to the table. I don't need to actually need my partner in any particular way or make them feel needed. Then you're going to fail. So if that's what you said on your podcast, and people were like, "Are you sure you're the right person to be giving advice?" Then I kind of agree with those people, OP, and I'm pretty sure that does not make me either a womanizer or a misogynist. Sometimes if you feel the need to throw around these terms, because I guess womanizers is not an insult in the same way that misogynist is, but if the only way that you can shut down arguments from other people is by calling them names, then that says something about you. So we have time for today. Feel free to like the video, leave a comment down below, and I will see you in the next one.